let's get started. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. I think everyone's pretty busy. And some of the things that especially you guys have to do dealing with blended families and reconstructed families means that you even have less time than many others at times. So what we thought we would be doing, Michael, Allie, Ian and I, was to present a little bit of the insight that we've gathered on how maybe we can help your families and help you guys deal with readjusted, reconstructed families. So, some background. It's not a new thing. Reconstructed families have existed for a long time, and we'll go over some interesting comparison between then and now on the next slide. But first, it takes many forms, many shapes, many names. It's sometimes remarried or cohabitating. Sometimes it's just dating. That's called for a reconstructed family or recoupled. It's happening in straight families and in gay families, and it's been named or labeled blended, complex step families, bonus families, remarried families, reconstructed families. So it is not a new thing. It's something that's fairly common, but it takes different shapes and sizes. Historically, though, it's come with a tainted reputation. It's been something that promoted myths around the wicked stepmother, like in Cinderella, or the abusive stepfather that's associated to it, or the discord between the family members and the siblings. There's also this idea that there's a bias toward your kin as opposed to your stepchildren if you're the parents. So there's an association that apparently would be stronger, or that's assumed to be stronger between the parents, the biological family members. And then there's a general belief in society that there's low confidence in the success of reconstructed families. So, like I promised earlier, here's some differences between then and now. And then is really, we're talking here about what happened in 15th, 16th, 17th century. It did exist. Actually, statistically, it reached its climax in the 16th century. The rate of remarriages as a share of all marriages was the highest at that point in time. Now, what that's hiding is the fact that maybe today we don't count all the cohabitation and the non-married recoupling that's occurring. But still, there's about a third of those marriages back then that were remarriages. And today, this is a little closer to a quarter, or 23%. This was often triggered by death in the past. So a spouse died and the other spouse with children would look to remarry. It was often easier and more prevalent for men to get remarried, and it was harder for women to get remarried. Back then, men remarried at a 2-to-1 ratio, whereas this rate today has come much closer to being even. It's a 1.2-to-1 ratio, male to female. In the past, children rarely had two living parents when this occurred, and today it's not the case. Divorce often is the cause for future blended families, and so moms and dads still exist or are still in the portrait. It was a matter of survival then, and today it's more of what could be deemed a matter of choice. Blended families are common. So we're making the point once again, but about 23% of all married people, I'm sorry about that, about 23% of all married couples are individuals that had been married in the past. And in fact, of new marriages, almost 60% includes either one person from that was previously married, or actually two people that were married in the past. So there's quite a bit of it. And then lastly, more recently, the stats are 52% of women that were previously married will remarry, and then the rate is a little higher for men, where it's about 6 out of 10 male that get remarried. Now, where this goes is that a lot of remarriages or recoupling or new unions are being reconstructed And so if we take it from the top, about 50% of marriages in our days are ending up in divorce. Of those 50%, about 60% lead to a remarriage or a new union. And now what's really critical is that 65% actually bring children with them. And in some, what happens is that what we're looking in the United States is over 30 million children are now involved in reconstructed families. So there's really a critical mass of kiddos that are affected by reconstructed families. Sorry about that. So one of the repercussion, or what so one of the things that's important to understand, there's this critical mass of 30 million children or more even being affected, and what's important to note is that research has shown that if we don't attend to those children, there is a higher risk of distress in long term. And some of the stats that are provided, or some of the facts that are provided on this topic, are that children that are not cared for properly or tended to, or for those that slip between the cracks in those situations, tend to be two times more likely to commit suicide than the rest of the population. They tend to end up with a lower education. The high school dropout rates are much higher, which in the end leads to lower paying jobs and maybe financial sustainability in the long run. They are more likely to suffer from mental disorders later in life, depression, anxiety, and so on. 300% more likely to need psychological support. That was a study based on teenagers. They are more vulnerable to drug abuse, which has its own repercussions, and they experience more relationship problems in adulthood. So another study, a more recent study and a really in-depth study, provides some more interesting fact. There was a study looking at 900 New Zealand children, and that's a study that's been done over a 30-year period of time where they tracked those individuals. And a couple things popped up. One is that divorce is not the cause of some of the issues we see down the road. Really, what is the cause is what was at the onset causing the divorce. So if we think of the discord, the conflict, maybe the abuse, the mental disorder, possibly, that led to divorce, are likely the causes that will still be around and affect those children down the road. So other corollary findings were that separation and divorce is not the death sentence for a child. If we tend to it, there are great outcomes, just like in more typical families. The second thing is that exposure to separation and divorce does not have to be detrimental. And that's a little bit of what we'll be talking about today. Did that again. So, in summary, what we've got is blended families are common. There's a lot of families that are reconstructed or blended. They involve an impressive number of children, and we all play a part in this. We all can help this turn into a great event and a positive outcome. And then that's the last point. Without proper attention, there's more risk. But if we start tending to it early on and we're aware of it, there's a chance that we have similar outcome as typical couples, typical relationships, which is promising for the child. So by tending to your blended family dynamics, you can help improve your children's chance to thrive. So what's coming up in the rest of this presentation, after seeing a little bit of background, is Ian will be chatting a little bit about the idea of the developmental stages of a child, which gives you information to understand what may be happening in your kiddo's brain, or where he or she is at in his or her life at this point. And then we'll look at families with Michael as a system, parts that are interacting. They're not isolated, and how do those things come together, and how does the system get so much more confused and complicated when you blend family. And then lastly, we'll look at applicable solutions where Allie's going to share some of the things that we can do in the day-to-day life to make sure we tend to those kiddos and just create a promising future for them.
So, divorce results in many changes for children and adolescents at a time when they're already experiencing many changes with their body. They're experiencing growth physically, mentally, socially, and emotionally. They're going through the typical milestones that we all think about, like starting to walk, starting to talk. Maybe eventually they start thinking logically, and even, believe it or not, developing empathy for the other people around them. Not to mention putting together and learning about who they are and how they fit into society. So the effects of divorce and the effects of the people around the children during these developmental years of 0 to 18 can ripple through the child or adolescent's life as they grow up. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what's happening in the development of children and adolescents and how the experience of divorce might affect them at different stages in development. So this is my handy dandy little timeline that I made, and over here is when the child is born at birth, and we're looking all the way over here to about 18 years of age. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is cognitive development. That's just how their brain is developing, how they're thinking, what they're able to think about, and how they sort of differentiate themselves from the rest of the world. The first stage in this development is called the sensory motor operational stage. And at this point, they're literally just trying to get all their limbs and motor skills together. They're also taking in a ton of information, and by the end of it, it's happening, here from birth to around age 2, they're forming the beginnings of their language ability and learning how to communicate with the people around them. They also are developing purposeful behavior over this time. As they move into the next stage from like roughly age 3 to 7, they're refining their language skills, they're learning how to communicate. They're still thinking largely egocentrically, so the world still revolves around them, and their basic mode of operation is to meet their own needs. But they are starting to learn how to follow simple rules that the environment and the people around them imposes. By the time they get into the elementary years, they're in the concrete operational stage. So as far as their thinking goes, they're moving towards logic, but they still have difficulty with abstract reasoning. And though they can appreciate the viewpoint of others and are less egocentric, they're still predominantly egocentric and thinking about themselves. And then the last stage of cognitive development in the middle school and high school years is called the formal operational stage. And this is when children, they become adolescents and they're finally capable of abstract thought, self-reflection, and having empathy for other people. Also, their sense of morals has developed, as well as what's best socially. And speaking of socially, they are becoming very social creatures by this point. A different type of development is social development. How does the child or adolescent act and react with the people around them? So there's several stages that everybody goes through as they grow up in terms of their social development. And the first stage happens here real early. It's just trust. This is happening around birth to age 1. And they are literally, hopefully, learning that the world is safe and consistent and predictable so that they can start to formulate an idea of what's going on around them. The second stage of social development, and I think we've all seen this with toddlers, is developing autonomy. This is where they're gaining their sense of self-control. And if you can show me a toddler who hasn't tried to impose their will on a situation, then I will probably give you $1 or at least a high five on the way out. The next stage of social development, kids are gaining initiative. And you can see this kind of lines up with those early elementary and elementary years. They're developing confidence to do the ideas that are in their head as opposed to having self-doubt and waiting for instruction from everybody else on what to do. As children get into the later elementary and middle school years, they're really working on building their sense of industry. This is really learning the range of skills that you need to be an adult in the world. And after that, way out here in those high school years is developing that sense of identity, which is your self-concept. But out of all the things you could be, who are you? Who are you and how do you fit into the world? So a lot of that is definitely happening in these formative high school years. And last but not least, I would mention, and it starts here in high school and certainly goes into adulthood, is developing your sense of intimacy and learning how to love people and how to have close friendships. A different way of thinking about social development is attachment. And as you can see by the timeline here, bonding and attachment is happening pretty much your whole life, but particularly with respect to the relationship between the child, adolescent, and their parent, bonding and attachment is certainly happening while they're in your household. So what do I mean when I say attachment? Well, this is just how children form bonds with you and attach to their caregivers, which forms the basis for later relationships. There's 3 different types of attachment, and the first one is really what we're shooting for. That's secure attachment. People who have experienced secure attachment are generally easy to know, and they're comfortable in intimate relationships. They rarely worry about being abandoned. This comes about by having parents who were described as warm and loving and supportive. On the other hand, there's a couple different types of attachment that don't have quite the same outcome. The first is insecure, avoidant, and based on the word you can imagine, it's not something we're going for. It does happen. And people who have an avoidant, insecure attachment had parents who were described as demanding or disrespectful and critical. And the way that these interactions resonate in the child and adolescent's life is that they develop a mistrust of others and an anxiety about being close to other people. They're often jealous, they have emotional distance, and a lack of acceptance for the relationships around them. Similar but a little different is insecure attachment. That's the resistant type. And this comes about when the parents of the child are unpredictable and unfair. So the kid just really never gets an idea of what they can expect in a relationship. And the ramifications of that later in adulthood are that the person is often worried about being overwhelmed because they don't know what to expect, so their emotions could go either way. They have intense emotions. They're fearful of being abandoned. Their emotions are all over the place in terms of emotional volatility, and often they're desperate in relationships. So attachment and how children form bonds to their caregivers is really important, not only during childhood and adolescence, but also on into their adult life. So in terms of divorce, how does the child or adolescent, given all that we just learned, experience it? Because they're going to experience it differently if they're here versus if they're here. Well, your little babies, they generally experience and perceive the divorce as stressful, but we can't tell much more. Whereas once you get to the toddler years, there's a definite fear of abandonment. They've already done a lot of attaching, and if the adults aren't present in their life, this causes that fear. Early elementary age kids, fear, guilt, self-blame, and shame. And later elementary, similar, grief and loss, anger, non-acceptance in that they don't want to accept that their parents are divorced. And we'll see a little bit about what that means here in a second. When you get to the middle school years, kids, they're turning into adolescence, they experience that loss and they feel it at an emotional level. They're often also, they're starting to be aware of what their parents say versus what their parents do, and they become critical of their parents while feeling powerless. They recognize that they can't control the situation, and they're often overwhelmed by their emotions. Into the high school years, girls often experience divorce, and they're very angry about it, angry with their parents, whereas boys are most often reported as sad. They start to assume adult roles, meaning that they try to compensate for the duties of the parent who they're not around. And In this stage, it's really critical that they have positive role models that model to them how to develop that sense of intimacy. And so the last thing we'll go through here in terms of this development is what are the signs of distress that they show. Your babies, it's fussy, it's changes in their eating or sleeping, and sometimes developmental delays. Into the toddler years, similar changes in eating and sleeping. They might regress stages. You know, if they were potty trained, they might not be potty trained. If they were going to bed well by themselves, they might start to show some resistance when they're going to bed. They also might demonstrate some developmental delays in terms of how they act with other kids or even just what they're doing. As you get to the elementary years, you might also see regressions of behavior. They do experience anxiety, and this often manifests as being disobedient, just giving you a hard time. It's important to know at this point that any kid can experience these. There's no doubt about that. So what we're looking for as parents is this a change from normal? And can we attribute this change to the divorce? We won't always know the answer, but we do want to look for those differences from what was the norm before. When you get into the elementary years, they might cry, they show high anxiety, they also show caretaking, which is super sweet because they feel powerless, but they also try and step in. Remember that non-acceptance piece? You'll often find children of this age trying to repair the relationship, trying to get their parents back together, get them talking on the phone, showing up in the same place. So some of their behaviors might be attributable to that desire. The middle school years, somatic complaints, that's your body, that's headaches, that's stomach aches, that might be difficulty sleeping, things like that. They get mean and accusing, withholding. They also have a difficult time concentrating in school. So if you're seeing some issues or getting some reports from teachers, that's one thing to think about. And as you get into the high school years, you'll also find that emotional distancing and withdrawal or acting out, both of which have a similar effect between you and your adolescent. They worry, they're mad, and they might start to demonstrate risk-taking behaviors. Now, again, risk-taking behaviors might happen with any kid, but if it really seems like it's ramping up or different from the norm, it's important to attune to that and work through it, and we'll talk more about that stuff in a little bit. So divorce does not have to be detrimental if we have consideration for where the child is at and intentionality with how we interact with them and how we carry on in our relationship with our children and adolescents. So with that said, we're going to move on into the last couple portions of our presentation. Michael will talk about characteristics of blended families, and after that, Ali will share with us some of the things that you can do today.
Okay, so we just got done talking about some history of divorce and blended families, as well as some of the developmental impacts that are to be considered with child and adolescents. So I'm going to next talk about blended families themselves. I'm just going to talk about some of the dynamics of blended families, and I'm really going to talk about this from a systemic perspective. So with family systems, there are really four underlying assumptions. First, what affects one family member will affect all the other families' members as well. Even if they were not perhaps directly related to a particular event, they will still be affected somehow. The second is that a system's behavior affects the environment, and in turn, the environment will affect that system. And third, a system is more than a collection of individuals. So a family system, you are one big unit. You are not just, each of you individually. You are a system of multiple individuals. And fourth, a system is not really a real physical entity. It's more of a model or a metaphor that is to be used. There are two important concepts to think about when talking about family systems, subsystems and boundaries. So subsystems are defined as really smaller units within a larger system, and boundaries are really defined as the type of relationship that people have in family systems, particularly between family members, and they are measured by the degree of permeability between that boundary. So before we get more into it, I just want to give some examples of some subsystems and boundaries. So some of the subsystems that easily come to mind, especially with blended families, you're going to have the spousal subsystem. You're going to have the parent and the ex-spouse. You might have the biological parent and their child. You might have the new step parent and a stepchild. You might have a subsystem between biological siblings, and you might also have one between step siblings. And then finally, you have metasystem subsystems, which this really goes into the extended family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, etc., and then as well as really the surrounding society as a whole. And then with boundaries, there's really three types of boundaries to consider. So the first boundary is a closed or rigid boundary. This boundary is too thick. Liken it to a wall without windows. It's rigid. There's no accessibility in between boundaries. So for example, two people that really cannot communicate with each other and two people that really conflict with each other, especially when they're communicating, that is an example of a rigid boundary. Second, you have your mesh boundary. This is kind of the opposite. It's too soft. Think about drawing a line through the dirt with a stick. It really doesn't take much to change or skew that boundary. Somebody that has an enmeshed relationship, they may say no to something that somebody else asks of them, but then be persuaded with really little encouragement or enforcement at all. All right, so essentially, when you are in your first marriage, in your first family, you are creating a new family system. You are creating a new set of rules, norms, regulations, and then once you divorce, and in this case, you remarry and create a blended family, you really are taking your former institution and you're remerging it into a new institution. In this case, you have an incomplete institution. There's not really an establishment of norms and rules that was taken from your previous marriage. You now have to merge that into a new system. And the failure to agree upon and reestablish these rules and norms can often be an indicator of future divorce. So an important thing to consider is that readjustment is a process. It is not something that happens overnight, and it's something that takes patience, communication, and hard work. And think about it like this. So, your first marriage didn't work out, but you can now use that as a learning experience. You can use what went wrong in that marriage and you can use it to change and better impact your new marriage. So how do you as a blended family go from an incomplete institution to a complete institution? One big way to do this is to create shared resources, values, rituals, meanings, and problem-solving methods. Create something that you as a family unit can agree on and use as a whole. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that blended couples or parents might face when readjusting, creating this new family system. Studies have shown that second marriages and beyond typically have a more rushed timeline than first marriages. That is, they typically happen in a shorter span of time. Also, with step parents especially, there is a fear of being rejected or fitting in. You're the new kid on the block. You're coming into a group of people that already know each other, and so your job is to fit in and not, kind of be that odd person out. And for you parents, what are your parenting roles going to be? If one parent's really an authoritarian with strict rules, the other one's maybe more collaborative, not as strict on the rules. When you come together, how are you going to create a new system where your systems mesh with each other? And as Ian alluded to briefly, and as I'll touch on later, adolescents are already undergoing a time of complex change and development, which can really lead to a more problematic relationship with blended families, especially with the step parents, the step parent being that kind of new person in. And then there's also a tendency to blame the step parent for the problems in a new blended family. Again, they're the new kid on the block. They are not as familiar with what's going on. So if things aren't going right, it's pretty easy to place the blame on that newcomer. And then also with the biological parent, you really have a problem with divided loyalties. Are you going to pay more attention to your new spouse? Are you going to allocate that attention to your children? So really finding how to give loyalty to all new members of the blended family can be a challenge. So while there are challenges, there are also strengths. So as I touched upon it briefly earlier, you as a parent or a spouse in a new blended family or marriage, you have a unique perspective. You have already been married once. You know what goes well in marriages. You know what didn't work very well with marriages. So this can really give you a unique perspective on your new marriage. And then you as parents, you are the heads of the family. The family dynamic really starts with you. If you are able to model a healthy, cooperative marriage, you can model that to your child or adolescents, and they will in turn be more likely to exhibit those kind of behaviors as well. And compassion equals connection. Show compassion to your spouse, show compassion to your children, and use that compassion to build connection. So next, this is just a quick graphic that I wanted to show you here. So this is, in this study by the Pew Research Center, you had participants in the study, they were asked, so suppose you know someone you knew had a serious problem and needed either financial help or caregiving. And then how obligated would you feel to provide that caregiving or that assistance if the person were your parent, your step-parent, your sibling, your step-sibling? And then all across the board, there was more of a need or not an obligation to help if they were your biological relative. So that just kind of shows you how there's already some existent bias between, supporting or cooperating with those new whether it be step siblings, step parents. So next, I'm going to go into the same thing, but with child and adolescence. So one of the challenges of being a child or adolescent in a new blended family is there is typically a weaker bonds of attachment to parents. So to go a little more in depth in this, so studies have shown that if you experience divorce as a child, so if you experience it pre-adolescence and then emerge into a new blended family, you are less likely to have stronger attachment to your parents, and that is regardless of gender. So also, in terms of parent-child solidarity, if you and your parents you do not have solidarity, that correlates to lower levels of social, financial, and instrumental support. And then as I touched on a little bit earlier, so complex adolescent development, these things are already happening, and those coupled with that, that immersion, that creation of blended families, that can lead to more difficult adjustment on the part of the adolescent. And children and adolescents typically perceive less support from their step-parents than their biological parents. And so that kind of goes the other way from the study that I showed, where these people may feel less obligation to their step family, but then they also might perceive less support from their step family as well. So, and again, there are not only challenges, there are strengths that children and adolescents of blended families have as well. Shared family experiences in childhood. So the more shared family experiences you have in childhood, the more likely you are to have an easier time adjusting to blended families in adolescence. And this is very important. Keep the child or adolescent involved in the process. Readjustment is a process. It takes time and it takes teamwork. So include your child or adolescent in that process, but it is very important to not include them in the conflict. So if there are conflict between you as the parents or the spouses, keep the children or adolescents out of that. And studies have also shown that adolescents are typically more able to, or more adept at adjusting to two-parent households than smaller children are. Just something to consider. They're maybe a little further along in their cognitive development. They're maybe more able to understand really the nature of those two-parent homes. And again, communication is key. So through this whole process, communicate with your child or adolescent. As your parent, what are your needs? What are your child or adolescent's needs? Take those into consideration. So as I've been talking here, you might be thinking, how does my blended family pertain to this? What is my family system? One way to physically, map out your family system is the use of a genogram. This is a sample genogram that I created here. It involves 8 people. You have your 2 original spouses, your new remarried step-parents, and then 4 children. And as I touched upon earlier, there are 3 types of boundaries in family systems. As I mapped out here, you have your healthy, your rigid, and your mesh boundaries. So as you can see, this looks pretty complex, and it's pretty incredible how a blended family that consists of 8 people can have so many different kinds of connections. So that might be something that you'd like to think about, is as you're looking at this, what does your family's genogram look like? What are the kinds of relationships that you have between certain people? Between a parent and their child, between a child and their step-parent, a step-sibling between a step-sibling, and so on. Okay, so I just got done talking about blended family systems and dynamics, and now I'm going to hand it over to Allie. She's going to talk about how to really make blended families work.
Thanks, guys. Really, really great stuff. You have a lot of information now. And what we want to do is take it and see how you can apply it in your everyday lives with your family. So, this is a really exciting time for you and something to be celebrated with joining a new family in a different phase of life and modeling for your children that love and connection and courage and resilience are all important things. So, kudos to you. Let's see, so we're going to start out by incorporating some of what Ian talked about with the developmental stages. You might see your children exhibiting certain behaviors, so we're going to talk about how to sort of gauge what they're trying to say to you and what they might be feeling and how you might want to react in a way that's positive. And then we're going to talk about really simple things that you can do in your everyday life with your family to build connection and unity and build those relationships. So, first, it can be hard to believe when your children are driving you crazy, but all behavior has a goal. Children do not have the way to clearly and verbally explain to us exactly what they need and what they're feeling. But they do speak the language of behavior. So what we can do, if we can learn to pick up on some of their cues of what they're trying to tell us, we might better be able to react and hopefully lessen some of those irritating, crazy-making behaviors as well. So we have 4 behaviors that are the main ones that we will see with children. So this first one, look at me. So a great way to figure out what your child is trying to let you know is how are you feeling? So if you're feeling annoyed, irritated, you're feeling guilty, that's a really good sign that your child might be seeking attention. Another way to see if that is their goal is do they stop whatever that irritating behavior is once you give them the attention? Say it's incessant fighting with their sibling. Once you turn to them and yell at them to stop, do they stop once they have your attention? So that's a good sign, and that's what they're looking for. And they might just be looking to have a connection with you or be more involved in the family. So really simple things that you can do. First off, you don't want to give positive attention while they're engaging the behavior. So it's tough, but ignore it. If you have to walk out of the room, that's what you do because you don't want to reinforce something negative and show them you will get attention if you're doing this thing that I hate. You could, instead of ignoring, you also could redirect to a useful task if it seems like something that would work in the moment with your child. And then other simple things you can do moving forward, building into your routine, is set up a special time to spend with your child so they get that attention and encouragement and love and affection. Setting up routines to give them a bit of structure can help as well. So first, behavior, attention. Our second one, so this is when you feel your child is really struggling with you to win. So if you're feeling angry, challenged, you're feeling threatened, you're getting heated, that might be a sign that your child is looking to be the boss. If they feel like they have won and they stop, that is probably a good sign that it's this behavior. So things that you can do, you definitely want to engage in the fight because for your child, it's not necessarily about winning, but it's about having a sense of agency or a choice in their life. So you're not going to win the fight really in every sense of the word. So you're going to disengage, you're going to let yourself calm down before you say something you don't mean or it escalates. And then you're going to acknowledge, I can't make you do something you don't want to do, but I would really like your help. So giving them a sense of power is important and asking for their help. And then you can offer them limited choices and make sure that you're okay with either option that they choose. And then you both win because they feel like they have some freedom to choose and you get to end the fight between the two of you. Our next behavior is I feel better when I hurt others. So this is a child who's lashing out in revenge because they're hurt. So are you feeling hurt, disappointed, disgusted, Is your child really escalating in behavior, intensifying, damaging property, hitting siblings when you're trying to calm them down? This is a big sign that it could be them wanting to get revenge. And usually it's because they're hurting. So a really good way to de-escalate this behavior is just to acknowledge their feelings. If they don't have the words for those feelings yet, which like a lot of children might not have, you can start with sharing your own feelings and modeling that behavior of, when you say this or that, I feel really hurt, or I feel sad, it hurts my feelings. If you can pinpoint that they're upset about something specifically that you've done, you can apologize and try and make amends. But again, it can be really helpful to model that, sharing your own feelings, and then they might become comfortable in sharing their own, and also know that you're a safe person who doesn't want to hurt them, and you recognize when you've done something wrong too. I mean, we're all fallible and we all make mistakes. So our last behavior, if you're feeling inadequate as a parent, maybe helpless, like you just want to throw up your hands and give up, that might be a good sign that your child is also feeling powerless. If they're giving up easily and keep on saying things like, I just can't do it, it's not worth it, then they could be feeling pretty powerless. And ways to help them here is to take tasks, break them down into smaller parts that really feel manageable to them, and help them with these tasks, whether it be like emotional, it could be at home, it could be at school. But if they are feeling overwhelmed and like they're going to fail, help them succeed by reminding them of the things they're good at, encouraging them when they do well, breaking tasks down, and never doing them for them, but helping to teach them and encourage them along the way. A big thing here for you as the parent is make sure you don't criticize, and you always encourage and play to their strengths, be interested in their interests, and you don't ever want to give up on them. You have to have patience because they are actively giving up on themselves. So you have to show them and give them that hope. So we have those 4 behaviors. So the attention, the wanting to be the boss, wanting to get even or revenge, and then this sort of giving up and powerlessness. And all of them are telling you something really important that now hopefully you'll have a better stance on hearing actually what is below that behavior that can be maddening, and knowing some responses that might really help you and your kiddo get along. So next, we are going to talk about some really easy and intuitive ways that you can build unity and connection in your new family. So participation by all family members is really important, especially when you're bringing together 2 like previously separate families or entities. So no matter the age of the child or the say that they get to have in the family, they should have some say that's developmentally appropriate, but making sure everyone is involved. They feel like they're getting attention, they matter, they're being heard. That's really important. That could even be like, we're going out to dinner tonight as a family, like everyone gets a say on where we're going or what kind of food they like. It could be really simple, but just find ways to integrate that into your everyday. You want to make sure to encourage each other's strengths. This is a lot like that last behavior, feeling powerless. Encouragement can go a long way. And it also distracts us from fault finding and blame if we're focusing on people's strengths and encouraging them. Also just having the courage to be imperfect. This is a very transitional time, really challenging transition. It's a lot of adjustments, and nobody's perfect, and that's okay. So modeling that for your children, I think, is important as well. And we have some good, just solid ground rules for communicating with your family. Like it was touched on earlier, when you model good, loving behavior for your children, they will pick up on it. We all know kids are total sponges for everything going on around them, whether it's good or bad. So if you are modeling good communication with your partner and openness and encouraging each other, your children will pick up on that and it will pay off. You want to make sure when there's an issue, you're speaking directly to the person that you have an issue with. And instead of using words like, you did this, you're wrong, making it about how you feel, using I statements is what we call that. And it helps lessen people feeling like they're attacked, and helps it so the situation doesn't escalate into a fight. So we're going to practice doing some I statements for you. So we're going to practice up here, and then we'll have you guys get together in pairs. So if you came with your partner, you can pair up there, or just grab someone who also needs a partner. But we will model it for you first. So first, we will show, without the use of I statements, what that looks like between a parent and child.
I just want to play my video games with my friends online, and every time she says something, you take her side. I hate you.
You got to stop with this. I'm tired of you blaming everyone for all your problems. You have to stop this language right now. Just go to your room. We'll talk about it later.
Okay. That didn't work so well, did it? Look at little Timmy's face. Now, let's try a little more constructive I statements for the same scenario.
I just want to play video games online with my friends, and every time she says something, you take her side. I hate you.
Man, I feel sad when you say hate. It really hurts me. Because I want our family to be happy. I would ask you to stop using the word hate and probably replace it with frustrated.
It seems like they want a hug now. It seems like they want to. That went well. Yes, see, I statements can be very, very powerful in bringing the family together. Everyone speaks for themselves, and no scapegoating is that blaming piece. Like, really concentrate on encouragement and not on blame or fault. Lastly, and really importantly, you need to have fun with your family, because it's a great way for you guys to bond, learn more about each other, and just experience joy together. It can be really cathartic. So here's just some simple ways that we came up with, and I'm sure you have a lot more you could think of in your home to sort of plan fun into your life with your new family. So having a weekly board game night, you can have a movie night, cooking dinner together, finding ways to be active outside, whether that's going for a hike or camping or whatever you all enjoy doing as a family. Just make sure the most important part is you're doing it together and you're having fun, whatever it is. That's a really important part, and it holds families together. And lastly, we're just going to quickly touch on some more therapeutic art activities, which you could Google expressive or therapeutic art for ideas. These might be good ways to work through some emotions that family members are feeling and can't express verbally. So the lighthouse idea is, the prompt would be, so there's a lighthouse in the storm, and I want you to draw yourself wherever you are in the picture and then explain what the lighthouse means to you. Something like that. So if your kiddo draws themselves in the waves, you might discuss what that means, that they're in the waves, or are they in the lighthouse? Okay, what does that mean? And it might tell you a lot about how they're feeling. And you could also do the activity yourself and talk about where you're at. The resilience activity would be, think of a really harsh environment and something that thrives in it, and draw that. You could draw it or paint it or sketch it, make a collage. And then each family member would talk about it. So it could be a flower growing out of a crack in the asphalt, or an animal in the deep sea. So that's a good way to help people realize their strengths and talk about resilience. Inside out box would be, put the qualities you know others see you about you on the outside, and then maybe some things that people don't see about you on the inside, and you can talk about that. So those are just three really simple prompts. There's way more out there. You could really just look them up online, but anything you do in that creative way where people are expressing their emotions through art or craft, these are three questions that would be important to ask of your family members when you're all doing that together. So first, would you tell me about it? Explain it to me. What does it mean to you? And then, what did you feel when you were doing this? What do you feel when you think about that you're on a boat in the storm. So those can be great ways to pull out some of the feelings that are harder to get to in the everyday with your family. So we have come to the end of our presentation today. Hopefully your mind is swirling with excited energy with all this information you've learned and ways to try out these new techniques at home. We just wanted to include a couple of resources for you if you wanted to continue learning more or get extra support. These are some books that we really like that touch on the topic of blended families. So this first one is more for the kiddos, and the second one would be more for you as the parent. And also EmpoweringParents.com has great articles on all sorts of things from co-parenting to dealing with difficult adolescents to expressive art activities. So you can check that out as well. And thank you so much for being here today. We hope that you have something great to take away.
Don't move.
See how many references we have?
Yeah, look at all those references.
I know.
We are
That's great.
here like this.
So Zed lasted 16 years. He's a cat.
What are some of the diet? I'm sorry.
There? Is that good?
How did you succeed in business?
I just wanted my. I don't see. Every time
You disrespect her. Disrespect her. You.
I want a hedgehog.
Go to your room and get a hedgehog.
Is there a hedgehog up there?
I don't get it, because I just want to, like, smoke some pot with my friends after school, and we're just, like, hanging out doing nothing, and then I come home, and you act like
Stop! Just go to your room and smoke some pot.
Okay. Everybody else's parents let them drink beer. Why won't you let me drink beer?
You don't.